So we're looking at the Gemara here on Daf Kuf Yud Beis, towards the middle of the Daf. Let's just review the last point, and I'll show you where we're up to exactly. The Mishnah had established that we have to guarantee that every Jew has 4 cups of wine for the Seder. And even an ani whose sole source of income is from the Tamchui, which is the soup kitchen, from which we supply people who don't even have money for shtei sudos, have to be granted that charity money. Can we reconcile that Mishnah at the beginning of Masechet Pesachim with the statement of Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva's position is that if a person is going to have to rely on charity money in order to make his Shabbos table into an enhanced table and upgrade his Oneg Shabbos, then he would rather be chol, let it be, the regular, let's say, hard bread and herring that he eats the whole week long. So we see that Rabbi Akiva wants to avoid having to come on to charity money, even for the sake of a mitzvah. And the Gemara reconciles this by suggesting that Dalid Kosos has a special status insofar as it is Persume Nisa. We had a little bit of a problem. We understood that reading the Megillah publicly or lighting the Hanukkah candle outside in the Rosh Hashanah, that's Pirsum Nes. It wasn't immediately apparent to us that drinking Dalid Kosos is Pirsum Nes. But apparently, the concept of Pirsum Nes is not public publicity, Pirsum, but rather even if you're demonstrating the miracles of Hashem in a private way, that's also called Pirsum Nes. You're demonstrating it towards yourself. And what we got up to was the Nitziv Mivalozhin, which is called the Merome Sadeh, that's here in the Mesifta footnote number Chaf. So once again, we're on Kuf Yud Beis, Amud Aleph, and in the Mesifta it's called Beis, it's the second page, and we're looking at the footnote number Chaf. He says the following, that this statement that when it comes to Pirsum Nes, like for example, drinking 4 cups of wine, we're required to even sell our garment in order to purchase the wine. A person is so destitute, but if necessary, that's what he'll do. And even though as a result there'll be an element of bizayon, obviously in the fact that he's selling his garments, and he's going to have to purchase a replacement garment, but nevertheless, that's what he has to do. So the Merome Sadeh wants to point out that reflects the shita of the Rashbam. However, Tosfos has a different opinion. Let me just close the door here. Sorry. Hainu shelo yimnes atzmo milakachas min hatamchui litzorech arba kosos. It means that he should not be inhibited about taking from the community charity chest those funds for the purpose of arba kosos. But Tosfos doesn't go as far as to say that he has to sell the garment in his closet in order to buy Dalid Kosos. In other words, how extreme of a bizayon he has to put himself out in order to guarantee himself Daled Kosos. The Rashbam goes very far with this, even sell a garment. And that's very humiliating, that you have to go out publicly and sell your used garments. Tosfos doesn't go that far. He says the level of, so to speak, humiliation here is to knock on the doors of the community charity funds in order to get money for Daled Kosos. Now, the Merome Soda says the following. Hikshu Pshita. If we take a look here on Daf Kuf Yud Beis, let's just find the place. You'll see in the wide lines that we count down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 lines down. And the Gemara says, Pshita. It was absolutely certain and clear to the Gemara that we have to give money from the Tamchui for the ani to buy Daled Kosos. He says the following. What the Tamchui has is not necessarily liquid assets, but rather tavshilin. That's what the Tamchui is all about. It's a soup kitchen. People wait online to get food. Now, the food has a market value to it. And we're going to sell that food on the market to convert it into liquid money, and that money will be earmarked to purchase Daled Kosos. And the Gemara thinks that that's Pshita. You're not telling me anything new by telling me that this is the process by which we'll guarantee to supply the ani with Daled Kosos. V'tirtzu, shachidushu min hatamchui, shekevan sheyesh lo busha gdola bekach, shekulam yavinu shehu min hatamchui. In other words, it seems, if I understand correctly, that the food was packaged, and he would take those packaged foods that were given to him by the Tamchui and go out to the marketplace and sell them. That's a busha. Everybody sees that he doesn't have any money of his own, and he is dipping into the Tamchui in order to get himself a couple of bucks to buy Daled Kosos. And the Gemara says, "L'tzor kvod Shabbos, Om Rabbi Akiva she'ein tzorch l'sbazos." So this is a big chiddush, because here we're telling him, for the sake of Daled Kosos, make a public announcement, so to speak, that you're taking money from the Tamchui. That's how poor you are. That's a humiliating statement. But as far as Shabbos is concerned, we didn't find that. On the contrary, we found Rabbi Akiva advocating that he doesn't humiliate himself by knocking on the doors of the community chest to receive charity in order to set up a Shabbos table and enhance his covered Shabbos. And the Mishnah is therefore telling us a big chiddush, that for Pirsum Anes, he should humiliate himself and get this packaged food from the Tamchui, go out to the market. Everybody realizes that he's supporting himself from the Tamchui in order to guarantee himself Daled Kosos. So once again, just to emphasize, the chiddush here of our Mishnah is that Pirsum Anes, in the case of Daled Kosos, puts this mitzvah on a very unique, shall we say, a high level, even though in this case it entails a certain profound element of humiliation, but that's what we have to do. So now the question becomes the following. What is Rabbi Akiva saying? Rabbi Akiva is talking about the case of Kvod Shabbos. Is he, in a sense, comparing Kvod Shabbos to other mitzvahs? Or is Kvod Shabbos really a paradigm of other mitzvahs? Meaning, what would Rabbi Akiva say about other mitzvahs in general? And there are two possibilities. You might say that Rabbi Akiva would repeat himself as he did by Kvod Shabbos and say, you know what? He's not required to humiliate himself for the sake of a mitzvah. Or just the opposite. Maybe Rabbi Akiva would say that Kvod Shabbos is on a lower level vis-a-vis other mitzvahs, and for the sake of Kvod Shabbos, he should not humiliate himself, but he would require, Rabbi Akiva would agree that we're required to humiliate ourselves, oneself, for the sake of another mitzvah. And if you see the second half of this footnote, he quotes the Chassam Sofer, Shegam Rabbi Akiva Modeh, Shebishvil Kol Mitzvah Yesh Lo Lakachas, Afilu Min HaTamchui, even though, as we said earlier, taking from the Tamchui is equivalent to publicizing the fact that you're so destitute, and that generates a certain element of profound humiliation. V'yomer es dino gaklin in suda shlishis. And what we're doing is now, according to some Sofer, we're taking Rabbi Akiva's Su'uda Shabbos and we're lowering it to a level that's below all other mitzvahs. Rabbi Akiva would require you, as a poor person in all other mitzvahs, to have to depend upon the Tamchui despite the humiliation involved. So why should Kvod Shabbos be on a lower level? Says the Chassam Sofer that Rabbi Akiva is addressing a case where he has enough money for 2 out of the 3 Seudos. The Kvod Shabbos is for the sake of the 3rd Seudah, because the Gemara Masechet Shabbos derives from the fact that it says Hayom, Ichlu Hayom, Ichlu Hayom, Ichlu Hayom 3 times, that you're obligated in 3 Seudos. He mentions here that the 3rd Seudah is Zeichel Aman. In the Parsha of Man, the Torah says Ichlu Hayom 3 times, to teach you that in addition to the 2 Seudos of Shabbos, you've got to add a 3rd Seudah. And the significance of the 3rd Seudah is to teach us that we should rely on Hashem, like the man that comes down from Shemayim. And that's a message for the poor person who wants to rely on the Tamchui and rely on other people who give money and contribute to the Tamchui in order for him to fulfill his mitzvah of the 3rd Seudah. And basically, Rabbi Akiva sees here almost an inherent contradiction in the 3rd Seudah, because the 3rd Seudah is meant to reflect the midah bitachon, that we rely on Hashem. And now what is he going to do? He is going to rely on other human beings and put his hand out to the Tamchui in order to make sure that he gets a Seudah Shlishis, which is Zeichel Aman. Is therefore Rabbi Akiva recommends or prefers Sheyase Shabbato Chol V'Yistaki L'Brios, that even if he has to forfeit the 3rd Seudah, that's what he should do. Because if he goes to the Tamchui in order to set up the 3rd Seudah, in effect, he is relying on man rather than on the Almighty. The Gemara in the Havamina thought that Rabbi Akiva would extend this principle and apply it to the case of Dalit Kosos, which again, the inherent symbol and meaning of the mitzvah is that we rely on Hashem who redeemed us from Egypt. And now, what is he going to do? He is going to, so to speak, sell himself in order to fulfill the mitzvah of Dalit Kosos by knocking on the door of the Tamchui and saying, well, I'm going to rely on you. And that, says the Chassam Sofer in the Havamina of the Gemara, undermines the Cheres element of the Dalit Kosos, which is meant to convey that we are totally reliant on Hashem. And the Chiddush of our Mishnah is that there's another dimension to Dalit Kosos. In addition to being Zeichel Cheres, it's a mitzvah of Pirsum Hanes. And for the sake of Pirsum Hanes, he has to lower himself, humiliate himself in order to come on to the Tamchui and beg, panhandle for that money to buy the Dalit Kosos, or alternatively sell one of his garments on the market. All that too, despite the fact that he'll humiliate himself because of Pirsum Hanes. There doesn't seem to be any discussion here about Pirsum Hanes per se. I'm just going to take a quick peek with your permission to what's called the Yalkut HaBiurim for this Daf Kuf Yud Beis and see if he mentions anything about Pirsum Hanes. Still looking? The only thing I find so far is on page Kuf Tzadi on the left column. I don't know if this will answer our problem, but Nechluku aposkim im efshal lilma misugyasenu l'nyer Chanukah asher gam hu mishum persumei nisa b'Rambam kosav sha'oni amisparnes min atzedakah chayv limkar ksuso k'dei liknos shemen v'ner l'ner Chanukah. So the Rambam, based apparently on our sugya, rules that for the sake of shemen l'ner Chanukah, which is also obviously Pirsum Hanes, a person would have to sell a garment if need be to buy the oil. And the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim Tov Reish Ayin Aleph writes, Afilu oni amisparnis min atzedakah chayv lishol al apsachim. He's got a panhandle. Likno shemen l'ner Chanukah. Because of Magid Mishnah, shemakara din b'sugyasenu. The source for this din is in our sugya. Shisika shabishum pirsumei nisa chayav bi'arba kos afilu oni amisparnis min atamchui. V'chein adin b'ner Chanukah mishum pirsumei nisa. V'chein hevi abeis Yosef b'shem Rav Magid v'chein Mishnah Bura b'shem Aposkim shatam mishum pirsumei nisa. Mashvish kamenoso lamavur b'sugyasenu shemishum pirsumei nisa chayav adam afilu litol ben atzedakah. Avol b'bira gra kosav Shemakar din sha'ani shoel o mocher ksuso b'shvil ner Chanukah hu mikal v'chomer. Shebesugyaseinu lahalon b'samuch nemar sha'af lefi Rabbi Akiva shesober asay Shabbat chachol al yitztarach lebrios b'kol makom chayav l'chvod Shabbos lahosif davar muad kigon kisa daharsan. All right, we didn't get to it. We're about to get to it. Mashma shavur davar muad chayav afilu lishol al psochim olim kar ksuso v'im avur kvod Shabbos came vade avur kiddush chayav shemavur shekiddush hayom kodem lekovet Shabbos. Ubemesechtes Shabbos mavur shener Chanukah konem lekiddush. V'im lamanu shavur kiddush chayav lishol al psochim v'limkor ksuso kal v'chomer avur ner Chanukah. Okay, there's a lot of nice insights here. It's not so relevant to us actually, but he's basically saying that we have a similar halacha in ner Chanukah that you'll have to, if need be, beg for charity for ner Chanukah. Of course, it also has the element of pirsum hanes. Tana debei Elio, afal pi shomer Rabbi Akiva say Shabbat chachol ve'al titzarach lebrios, aval osu davar mu'at b'toch beso. He has to at least add something to the table on Shabbos for Kovet Shabbos. My ninu, what would be something that's not so significant, but yet it would be enough to enhance his Sudamar Papa? Kasa daharsana. These are fried small fish, fried together with flour in oil. And Kedisnan, as we saw in the Mishnah in the 5th parak of Avos, Rabbi Yehuda ben Taimomer, heavy az kanomer kal nesher ratz katzvi gibar kari lasos ritzon avicha shveshamayim. So we see how important it is to be mechamed Hashem. Person should be like these different Baalei Chayim, and to be mischazik b'mitzvahs, even beyond what he's normally capable of doing. And therefore, he has to add a little bit l'kvod Shabbos, even if it's only kasa daharsana. All right. Once again, we're going to see where we can pick up our sugyas of Leil Pesach. Long dapim here if I got it. Huh? All right, let's start with the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Yud Dalet. And now we're up to the first of the 4 kosos, and that is the kos of Kiddush. And he's going to recite Bori Pri Gofen, Makadosh Yisrael Vazmanim. But what is the seder of the brachos? Mazgulo kos rishon. Beit Shammai omrim mevarach al hayom, v'achkach mevarach al yayin. Beis Hillel omrim mevarach al yayin, v'achkach mevarach al yom. So obviously we're more familiar with Beis Hillel, that the Bar Pri Hagafa comes first, and then the Berchas HaKiddush, the Kiddush Hayom of Makadosh Yisrael Vazmanim comes last. But Beit Shammai has it in the exact opposite order. First, he should recite Kiddush Hayom, and then he should be Mevarach Bar Pri Hagafa. Now, ostensibly, at first glance, Beit Shammai make a lot more sense of Beis Hillel. First of all, he wants the Bar Pri HaGofen to be right before his Shesiyah, therefore it should be last. And secondly, if you ask which is the main bracha of Kiddush, it's obviously the Kiddush Hayom. So therefore you might as well start with the Ikar bracha, Tana Rabbanan. And the Bryce is going to explain the Yesod of this machlokes. Dvarim shebein Beis Shammai Beis Hillel b'Seuda. We're going to now give a list of different issues in Seuda about which Beit Shammai and Beis Hillel were at loggerheads. They were debating it. Beit Shammai omrim mevarach al hayom v'achach marach al yayin mipnei shayom gorim l'yayin yavom sheyom. Right? Why are you drinking wine? Because of the mitzvah of Kiddush. So you might as well start with the mitzvah of Kiddush and recite the bracha on Kedushas Hayom. And only then will you drink the yayin, because the yayin is brought about by the Kiddush Hayom. So you might as well start with the bracha of Kiddush Hayom that generates the yayin. Without Kiddush Hayom, there would be no Kiddush and there would be no yayin. Again, you want to drink wine during the course of your meal, that's one thing. But a wine that you're drinking before the meal, that's only because of Kiddush. So you might as well start with Kiddush. So argues Beit Shammai. Now Beit Shammai offers a second explanation as to why Kiddush Hayom comes first. And he says, Ukvar Kiddush Hayom, V'adayin yayin lo ba. As soon as the stars come out, it's already Kiddush Hayom. And you haven't even brought the yayin to the table yet. Let's see if we can add a little bit of explanation to Beit Shammai's second tam. He says the following. The bracha of Kiddush is related to the Kiddush Hayom, which is generated by Tzeis HaKol Chavim. We don't recite Kiddush before Tzeis HaKol Chavim, because that's when the Yom is sanctified. It's got Kiddush Hayom. So the bracha of Makadesh, etc., is appropriate after Tzeis HaKol Chavim, not before. So the yayin is the yayin of Kiddush. And Kiddush itself is manifest in the bracha of Kiddush, Mekadesh Yisrael Vazmanet. So the bracha is attached to the Kiddush Hayom, and that's the bracha of Kiddush Hayom, Kiddush Hayom. And the yayin is going to be a result of the Kiddush Hayom. But again, the premise here in the second explanation of Beit Shammai is the sequence, the chronological order. First comes Kiddush Hayom, and then you can be Mekadesh al Yayin. But you and I know that that's not really so, because a person could be Mekadesh al Yayin even before nightfall, which many people do during the summer months. So if you take a look at footnote number Chaf Beis, he says, he could set up Kiddush before Tzeis HaKol Chavim. So how do you know that the chronology is Kiddush Hayom first, and then Kiddush al Yayin? You can have Kiddush al Yayin even before the Kiddush Hayom enters. But again, you have to keep in mind that that is conditional on the fact that he was makabel on himself Shabbos, which is called Tosefes Shabbos. So even then there's Kiddush Hayom first, and then Kiddush. The yayin can only come after Kiddush Hayom. It's not the astronomical Kiddush Hayom of Tzeis HaKochavim, but it's your personal acceptance of Kiddush Hayom. Ubira Rashba, Shegama Makadish Mibod Yom. What do you mean? If he's making Kiddush Mibod Yom, well, you telling me there's no Kiddush Hayom? How can you make Kiddush if there's no Kiddush Hayom? It's impossible. So you'll tell me, well, it's before sunset or before the stars came out. Well, no. There's a Kiddush Hayom that could start even earlier. And he says that Gama Makadish Mibod Yom Chalav Isa Malacha, meaning the Kiddush that he recites when it's still daylight is a Kabbalah Shabbos. And the Kiddush Shabbos now generates an Isa Malacha. Shashu Omer Kiddush Alakos. So, there's a whole deal in the poskim about Hadlakas Neros, a woman who lights Shabbos candles. Well, that automatically is a Kabbalah Shabbos. Back and forth, debates, opinions. But one thing is clear, that if a person recites Kiddush, that certainly entails and is predicated on Kabbalah Shabbos. So you have Kiddush Hayom, and then you have Kiddush, but it's always going to be that sequence. Kiddush Hayom first, and then Kiddush second. Without Kiddush Hayom, there's no Kiddush. Hence, Beit Shammai's second answer to explain why is it that the bracha on Kiddush Hayom should come first, and then the Bar Pri Hagafen second. V'hainu shemiyachu notel hakos lekadesh. He's picking up the cup. He hasn't even recited Kiddush yet, and he's already Nesar Malacha. He was Makabel on himself Kiddush Shabbos. It's before Tzeis HaKochavim. He hasn't yet recited Kiddush, but he's picking up the Koshel Kiddush. That action of picking up the Koshel Kiddush is itself a Kabbalah Shabbos. And therefore, Nesar Malacha, he hasn't even recited Kiddush yet, but he's awesome in Malacha. Ukvar Kiddush Hayom Etzlo. Emphasize that word Etzlo. For him, on a subjective level, there's Kiddush Hayom. And that's the din of Tosefes Shabbos. So Beit Shammai is correct in assuming that there's no Borei Pri Hagafen of Kiddush until there's Kiddush Hayom, whether it's Kiddush Hayom in the objective sense, which we call astronomical Kiddush Hayom, Tzeis HaKochavim, or Kiddush Hayom on a subjective level, because he was makabel on himself Tosefes Shabbos, he's asur b'melacha, and then and only then can he recite Kiddush. He gives another technical explanation of Beit Shammai's second answer, and he says, Yesh linig b'brachas al pi rov. Al rov he'mekach mashetech. I think that's a fair statement, even in our contemporary life. At most of the time that we recite Kiddush, you take, the all the Shabbos of a year, you'll find that the majority we recite Kiddush after it gets dark. See, I would suggest, I have no proof for this, that according to Beis Hillel, if he were to switch the order around and start with Kiddush and Kiddush Hayom, and the bracha that came first, which he shouldn't have done, was Mekadesh Yisrael Vazmanim, and then he drank the wine, I would say that according to Beis Hillel, he was Yotzei. And even though he didn't do it in the right sequence, but he has both brachos. and he was Yotze. But the other way around, I doubt, according to Beit Shammai, if he could be Yotze, if he were to recite the Bar Pri HaGofen first. Because what generates the Bar Pri HaGofen, argues Beit Shammai, is the Kiddush, which is manifest in the Kiddush Sayom Bracha of Brachat Hashem and Kaddish Sov Azmanim. The Bar Pri HaGofen on the Yayin is premature. It's as if he had recited Bar Pri HaGofen before the Kiddush Sayom, which is meaningless. And he wouldn't be Yotze B'di'evet according to Beit Shammai. Which would mean that we have a very extreme, polar extreme machlokas here, in which Beis Hillel lechatchila requires that the Bar Pri HaGofen come first, and Beit Shammai would say even b'di'evet, if he recited Bar Pri HaGofen first, he was not Yotze. But we could say that within the context of Beit Shammai, there might be two different scenarios, two different levels in halacha. If it's astronomically still daylight out, and there's no Kiddush Hayom for anybody, then when he recites Kiddush, the only meaning to the Yayin is Kiddush, because Kiddush is a Kabbalah's Tosefes Shabbos. Hence, the Yayin is meaningful. But if it's still light out, and he starts with Bar Pri HaGofen, according to Beit Shammai, that's meaningless. In another case, where it's already after nightfall, even Beit Shammai might agree that if he started with Bar Pri HaGofen, he was Yotze, because of the objective Kiddush Hayom. The fact that he has not yet recited the bracha, that doesn't undermine the Kiddush Hayom, which exists for everybody in the world, because the stars are out. But I would certainly insist that if, according to Beit Shammai, he started Mibod Yom with the bracha of Bar Pri HaGofen, I don't think he was Yotze. There's no Kiddush Hayom. Excuse me. There's no objective Kiddush Hayom because the stars aren't out, and there's no subjective Kiddush Hayom because he hasn't been Mekabel Shabbos yet. Now, if he made a declaration, I'll say it in Yiddish, Bamir is Shabbos. For me, it's already Shabbos. And then he recites Bar Pri HaGofen, then maybe b'di'evet, according to Beit Shammai, he would be Yotze. But clearly, if the action of Kiddush itself is his Kabbalah's Kiddush HaShabbos, and he starts with Bar Pri HaGofen before the bracha of Kiddush HaShabbos, that would be meaningless. Again, this is all just shooting from the hip. Now, on the bottom here, going on to the second page, he has an Aruch LaNer. Yitachen ofen nosav shebo ba yain kodem shekidish hayom. Kigon she'ochel v'shosu v'bod yom. Ube'emsa sudaso kidish hayom. Sha'olav lahafsik sudaso l'kadish. ובאופן זה בא היין לפניו, קודם שחל עליו חובס קידוש היום. What is the Aruch LaNer saying over here? Anybody? Let's try it slowly, piece by piece. The Aruch Ner is presenting a scenario in which there are two parts to a Seudah. Part one, which is before Kiddush Hayom, on a Friday afternoon, he started his Seudah. He continues his Seudah into the night, and with nightfall, we have part two of his Seudah. Now the question is, does that second part of the Seudah have a status of Kiddush Hayom? Is it a Seudah Shabbos? Clearly, the beginning of his Seudah, the first part of his Seudah, which he ate while it was still light out on Friday afternoon, that's not a Seudah Shabbos. But does the Seudah change its complexion with Seis HaKochavim? So the Aruch Ner postulates that we need an agent to discontinue the first Seudah as a Seudas Chol and generate a second Seudah as a Seudas Shabbos, to take one Seudah and divide it into two parts. Each one has a different complexion. How do you do that? How do you accomplish that? If he benches, that's one thing, but he's not benching. He's continuing his Seudah. Says the Aruch Ner, he has an agent, a Maisa that he can implement that ends the first Seudah and begins a new Seudah. Not in the sense of Seudah as far as Dine Brachos and Birkas Hamazon. No, in that sense, it's all one Seudah. But as far as creating a Seudah Shabbos, he could create a Seudah Shabbos out of a Seudas Chol by setting up Kiddush. The recitation of Kiddush in the middle of a long Seudah is going to effectuate a change in that Seudah, that from the Kiddush and on, that Seudah becomes a Seudah Shabbos. So it's through the Kiddush that he terminates the first Seudah and generates a new Seudah. The first being a Seudas Chol, and the second now a Seudah Shabbos. So far, so good. So the Aruch LaNer now says the following chidush. Assuming he's been drinking yayin during the course of this Suda, he's got to effectuate a change in the Suda itself in order to achieve a Suda Shabbos. Because we said that Kiddush is going to be the agent, the catalyst, that's going to set up a new Suda, a Suda Shabbos, which he's obligated to do. He's not allowed to eat a Suda's Chol on Shabbos. Shabbos is dedicated exclusively to a Suda Shabbos. And that's why, for example, we're not allowed to eat before Kiddush. What's that all about? The answer is because if we eat before Kiddush, that's a Suda's Chol, and we're not allowed to eat a Suda's Chol on Shabbos. See, Aruch LaNer claims that in order to begin that process of Kiddush for the sake of setting up a termination of one Suda and the initiation of another Suda, we need Yayin. The Yayin is going to serve that function. And in this scenario, claims the Aruch LaNer, the Yayin comes before Kiddush. Because it's the Yayin that has the special status here of a Su'uda. So now it got dark out in the middle of his Suda that he started on Friday afternoon. He's now obligated to set up a Suda Shabbos. He will do so with Shtiyas Yayin. And the Aruch LaNer is being mechadish two chidushim here. Chidush number one is that even Beit Shammai would agree that in this scenario the Bar Pri HaGofen should come first. And number two, even if he made a Bar Pri HaGofen at the beginning of the meal on Friday afternoon, he would need a new Bar Pri HaGofen in order to establish and generate a new Su'uda, a Su'uda which could become a Su'uda Shabbos. And all this is an obligation that's generated by Chashecha, by the fact that it became dark and it's Shabbos. So whereas Beit Shammai would in general advocate that we start with Kiddush Hayom and then we get the Yayin, because the Yayin is generated by the Kiddush Hayom, there's a situation, a scenario which is just the opposite, where we need the Yayin first in order to terminate the original Su'uda and set up a new Su'uda. And just like every single Su'uda of Shabbos requires Kiddush al Yayin, the Yayin sets up a Su'uda Shabbos. But whereas Beit Shammai maintained that in general, although the Yayin sets up a Su'uda Shabbos, we need Kiddush first, because you cannot set up a Su'uda Shabbos through Yayin without Kiddush. Because the Yayin can't set up a Su'uda Shabbos on its own, it's got to have Kiddush. So the Kiddush comes first, and the Bracha Mekayis Shel V'Zmanim is first. But there is a situation where the Yayin plays a primary role and the Bar Pri HaGofen on the Yayin has to come first before Kiddush. And that's in a case where he has to terminate one Suda and commence a second. And the catalyst is going to be the Yayin. This Yayin is not part of the Yayin of the first Suda, Mibod Yom, but rather is part of the Yayin of the Suda Mishchashachshecha after it got dark. And the yayin is going to create that Suda to allow me to cut off the first Suda and generate a Suda Shabbos. So let's see it inside, if this is what he means. That the yain has to come first, even according to Beit Shammai. Right? He's eating and he's got wine on the table. He's drinking, and it's Friday afternoon. He's not yet finished with his meal. It became dark. Interesting scenario. He needs to create a hefsek in his Suda. And in the context of the hefsek of his Suda, the catalyst of which is Kiddush, which he's obligated in by virtue of the fact that it became dark out, he needs to be kovea a brand new Suda with Yayin. So the Yayin has to come first. I think he means by lefanav, meaning before Kiddush. Forget about Kiddush Hayom. We need a hechatimtza of a Suda Shabbos. Kiddush Hayom is going to be attached to and generated by Suda Shabbos. But his Suda is a Suda Schal. So what he needs is Yayin to set up a Suda Shabbos, and now he can make Kiddush. And in this scenario, everything's topsy-turvy, and even Beit Shammai would agree it's the Yayin that generates the Kiddush. Normally, it's the Kiddush that generates the Yayin, hence Beit Shammai's opinion that the Kiddush comes first. Here's a scenario in which the Yayin has to come first. The Yayin is going to generate the Kiddush, because the Yayin sets up a new Suda, terminating his old Suda. Now that we have a new Suda that exists, we can recite Kiddush. But he needs the Yayin to achieve that goal.
So that's really appropriate when we sometimes have, when Purim goes into Shabbos, to separate our Purim Suda from our Shabbos meal.
Right, not in Efrat. You mean in Yerushalayim?
In Yerushalayim.
Correct. And the Koi Te'orach Laner, even Beit Shammai would agree in that scenario, in that case, you have to start with Yayin. The Yayin is going to set up a new Suda. Sorry to hear that.
Now, back in the time of, now we have like the introductory paragraph that we say at Kiddush on Friday. They wouldn't have done that back in Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai time, or they did?
I would assume they did. I don't know. Maybe you know something that I don't know.
No, I'm just saying. So that in itself wouldn't been enough to separate?
No, because he's in the middle of a Suda. Are you talking about the Orach Laner now? Yeah, he's in the middle of a Suda. You know, recitations will not break up a Suda into two parts. I can't just declare, Morev Rabosai, I'm starting a Suda Shabbos. You can't do that. You need action on the ground, as we say. What action on the ground is to set up a new Suda by drinking wine. Now, there's another option. And basically everything that we're discussing today would apply even to pas, even to a loaf of challah and hamotzi lechem min haaretz. We prefer perhaps yayin because ain't shira la yayin, but you could be mekadosh ala pas. So what he's going to have to do now is, he's been eating bread the entire Suda for an hour before Shabbos. He's going to have to now take out a new loaf of bread, make hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and then recite Kiddush. And that hamotzi lechem min haaretz will set up a new Suda. The Orach Laner is discussing a case where he's reciting Bari Pri Hagafen and drinking wine to set up that new Suda. And that action of setting up a new Suda is mafkia. It undermines and vitiates the original Suda of Suda's Chol. Because until I clear the way and get rid of my Suda's Chol, there's no way I can recite Kiddush, because the whole purpose of Kiddush is to set up a Suda's Shabbos, but I can't do so because I'm already involved in the midst of a Suda's Chol. And for that, I need Yayin. It's pretty sharp, pretty impressive, this Sorach on there. Took me a while to figure it out. Of course, you guys understood it from the beginning, but all right. Now, before we end, let's see if we can fit in one more piece over here, one more paragraph. Lidas hasovrim shechovas kiddush ala kosu min haTorah. Whoa. This is the sheet of Rashi. As far as I know, no one accepted this sheet of Rashi, but Rashi is of the opinion that setting up a kos yayin for Kiddush is a doraisa requirement. All the Rishonim agree that it's the Rabbanan. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, this Rashi is in Masechet Nazir, which is now being studied in Daf Yomi, because a Nazir is enjoined from drinking wine, and the issue is, can he drink wine at Kiddush? And Rashi would insist that yes, because the Torah requires him to drink wine. Varehu shayayin gorim lekiddush eteyomer. Shekain ef shalakaimam lelo yayin opas. If the Torah requires kiddush ala yayin, then the entire entity of kiddush is only possible and is only a result of yayin. Beit Shammai would now have to agree that yayin has to come first, because there's no kiddush without yayin, and that's the doraisa halacha. It would seem, therefore, that we could prove from Beit Shammai that kiddush al yayin is only d'Rabbanan. Achladas asov shekiddush al kos midrabbanan. Sorach bir madua hayayin gorim lekiddush teyomer. It's very strange, he should have had a separate footnote here for this paragraph, because he just jumped ship from Beit Shammai to Beis Hillel. Till now he was talking about Beit Shammai. No, it's my fault. I made a mistake. I jumped the gun. This is footnote number Chav Gimel. I thought this was a continuation of Chav Beis, so we jumped in the middle of Chav Gimel. He says, Mitzvahs Kiddush Hayom, and again, this is Beis Hillel, Hu min haTorah, Acharishon Nechleku Gam Chova L'Kadish Al Yayinu min haTorah, Re'ei Tosus Li'el, Shestapku B'Sukkah Noktu Tosus, Shekiddush Hayayinu Rak Midrabanon, Chen Das HaRambam, Omnom HaRashba v'HaRosh v'HaRan Sovrim Shechovas Kiddush Al HaKos Hi Midoraisa. Now, I knew it as Rashi Shita. Wow, this is impressive. Very impressive list of Rishonim that maintain that Kiddush is ala kos. That's a doraisa requirement. So Beis Hillel is certainly correct then that yayin comes first, because there's no Kiddush without yayin according to those Rishonim. But l'das hasov shekiddush al kos mirabanan, let's say we go according to the Shitas HaTosfos and the Shitas HaRambam, is sarach bir madua yayin gorim lekiddush eteyomer. Halo gam misha ein lo yayin chayiv levarach es birchas hakiddush kedei lekayim mitzvahs kiddush min haTorah. Wow, that's impressive. If you hold, like I always understood almost all the Rishonim, but I say I was wrong about that, that you can have Kiddush Midaraisa without Yayin, then what is Beis Hill arguing here? Shayayin Gorim LeKiddush Teyomer. Forget about Yayin. You don't have Yayin, you'll recite Kiddush without Yayin. I think I'm going to stop here. I'll tell you why, because I want to figure this out on my own. So I'm going to make a little note that we got up to here. Okay, then? And after this, we're going to get into the Mishnayos about the Seder, the Seder of Leil HaTesla, which is what our Pesachim is famous about. Okay, then, Rabbosai? So I don't know, John, are you available for Sanhedrin? Yes, okay, so we'll have a chavrusa. All right, everyone should have a great day. Thank you so much.